Okay, welcome to Profile Tips number 1. For this one, what we're going to talk about is probably the most hated thing about building any airplane at all, and that's making hinge slots. We're going to be using the Great Plains hinge slotting tool, which I think is an invaluable tool if used properly. There's a couple of pitfalls about this tool that I'm going to let you know about. How this thing works is there's two, you can kind of see it here, there's two blades, and they just kind of, they work like a scissors. They slide back and forth like this. The biggest thing to worry about is that you need to make what I like to call a priming slot with your razor blade. So make a little slice inside of your hinge line here to give a kind of like act as a guide for the blades to go in. If you don't, what'll happen is as they start to go through, if any fibers can get between the blades, what's going to happen is they're going to separate, and they'll make two independent hinge cuts, and that's going to play hell when you're trying to put the hinges in place. Usually what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to wick some thin CA in there and then try it again. The other thing that's going to happen is your blades are going to bend just a hair, and every time you put it into a hole again, it's going to do the same thing, and you're going to have to replace your set of blades. So let's get started with the way how I've done this, or at least how I've come up with a way that works well for me. First of all, put marks where your hinges are going to be. Take your razor blade, and probably about half an inch over from where it's going to be, poke the tip right through the very top. Now it doesn't have to go in very deep, maybe an 1/8 inch or so, and you push it straight down inside. Now what you need to do now is, it's kind of like if you go back into school, remember those paper cutters, kind of like that guillotine looking thing? What you do is you roll the blade down, so I can get the good view here. You roll the blade down so that it's going to be in line with the hinge. What that does is that prevents the blade from wandering. If you try to take the blade like this and you try to slide it across, what's going to happen is you'll wind up going all over the place. So you're looking for a really straight priming cut. At least that's what I like to call it. So you put your blade in here and just run a piece down. Now it's not in all that deep. That's about all you need. All you're looking for is just a guide for the hinge cutting tool. So pull this out. Now in front of the camera here, this is going to be kind of tough, but right in front of you it's fairly easy. But what you want to do is, after you've made that cut, just kind of wedge it in there at a slight angle like this, and just give it a slight bump and it'll start cutting. And then once it's made its way through there, straighten it out and just hit the button, and there you go. You've got right along the, you can kind of see it right along the center of this, and straight through. You have a perfect hinge cutting hole. Couldn't be any easier, as long as you follow those tips. Now the other downside to this tool is that the blades here are kind of right in the center, so there's got this big old lip hanging out. So if you have an elevator or one like this that has these counterbalances on it, you have to make sure that you mark your hinge point inside far enough so that it'll be able to go inside. If you try to cut it too far in, you're not going to be able to do that, and you'll have to do it with a razor blade. Now next thing we'll talk about is, if you don't have one of these, you can still use just a regular old razor blade. Now how you do that is you pretty much start off the same way. You put the tip of the blade right into the center, and then you rock the blade down. Now what that does, I think we've covered this before, but what that does is that prevents it from being wavy, and that you're just going to roll the blade down and make a nice straight line right in line with your hinges. So now this is very, very, very important. Slowly drag the blade across that line that you just made without cutting very deep. Do that 2 or 3 times just to make a nice, semi-deep, probably about 1/8 inch or so, a priming channel for the same thing. Now what this is going to do is, when you shove the blade down inside of here, you can slide it across, and it's going to act as a guide to keep it from wiggling. So now that you've made that through here, you can take your razor blade, and you wiggle it back and forth and push it all the way through. Now, if there's only one thing that you ever listen to me about, is this: do not try and drag the blade through to make this cut. what can happen is, as you're pushing through, the wood can split, and then you're going to wind up pushing your blade, and the blade will just kind of let go. Now, if your hands are in the way, the blade is not going to stop until it hits bone or goes through. So that's one important safety tip. What you can do, however, is just rock the blade back and forth. Put a little bit of pressure this way, and just rock it back and forth. You can make a nice, really clean cut with a lot of control. It just takes a little bit of patience, but you just slowly rock the blade back and forth until you're done. And there you go. Once again, you have a perfect hinge slot right in the center, and another one right in the center. That's using a razor blade or the hinge slotting tool. Okay, next comes time to install the hinges. Now here's just a regular old CA hinge, and I'll take a small block of wood, and this is done to make sure that they are centered in the slot. What we'll do is we'll take a small pin, and like I say, a small block of wood, and what I'll do is I'll take a pin and I'll push it right through the center of the hinge. And what that does is that acts as a point to where it won't, to where it can't slide in and out. I don't have the fuselage finished, so we're going to have to use the wing. So here's the aileron. You take this after you've already cut your hinge slots. Take the hinge, and you slide it in, and it's going to stop about halfway through. Do that with all of them for one side. Okay, now that you have each one of your hinges pressed in place, it comes time to mount it to the other surface. So in this case, we're just going to, it's best to start at one end. Say right here, work one hinge in and just slowly push it down, working one hinge in at a time. Once you get them all in place, just kind of wiggle it back and forth until they're seated. So let's go ahead and give this a try. This is something that often takes a couple of tries and several minutes to figure out. But so you put, can you see that here? Okay, so you put this hinge in the beginning, move on to number 2, number 3. You can use 2 hands, but just with the first two in place, you can wiggle the aileron back and forth or whatever, and just to get this one to align. Now you can do that as you go one by one, and just persistence pays here. Okay, so now we have all the hinges started, and what we need to do now is just slowly rock it back and forth until, as you can see, they're all pressed into place. Now then, next thing you do is pull out your pins. And then you can do your final seating. And next comes time to glue it in. Now there has been some talk about, before you put the hinges in, you drill a small hole right through the center to allow the CA to soak into it further. I've never found that to be necessary, and I've never had a hinge fail on me because of that, so I just don't do it. But what I do is, once you're ready to glue it, take the hinge and you fold it down, probably a lot more than you would expect it to go in flight, and then just put 2 drops of CA on each individual hinge and hold it down until 15 to 20 seconds or so. Kind of wiggle it back and forth, and turn it over and do the same thing on the other side. And there you go. You should have a hinge that should last you for the entire life of your model.